Montana Territory, June 1879. The wind dragged dust across the plains as the sun dropped behind the Absaroka Mountains, and Zadie Albright stood barefoot in the dirt, a shotgun shaking in her hands. "Get off my land," she said, voice raw from screaming. The man on the horse raised one palm not to threaten, just to show he was not reaching for his own weapon. He looked like he had been riding for days. Dust clung to his boots, his hat was sun-bleached, and his blue shirt was dark with sweat. "I ain't here to take anything," he said. "Name's Elias Hart. I saw the smoke." Zadie looked past him at the half-burned barn and the trail of soot that still curled from its remains. Her grip on the shotgun faltered. "I do not need help," she whispered. Elias looked at the two small children behind her barefoot, thin, clutching each other's hands. The girl could not have been more than 7. The boy maybe 5. Their faces were streaked with ash. "You got 2 kids and no roof for them," Elias said quietly. "You do not have to trust me. But at least let me help them." Zadie lowered the gun. He dismounted, slow and cautious, and tied his horse to the post that had somehow survived the fire. He did not ask questions, just took his coat off, laid it around the boy's shoulders, and started walking toward the barn ruins. Zadie followed, arms crossed tight. She had not asked for a savior. The fire had taken everything: her husband's tools, the hay stores, the 3 goats they could not get out in time. It had started with a lightning strike, and by the time she got the children out, it was too late. "I do not know how to rebuild," she said flatly. Elias picked up a half-burned beam and tossed it aside. "No one does, not the first time." "I did not ask you to stay." "You did not," he agreed, but he stayed anyway. By nightfall, he had cleared the worst of the wreckage and got a canvas tarp stretched between 2 fence posts to keep the wind off the children. He gave them jerky from his saddlebag and told them a story about a fox that stole a sheriff's horse. Zadie sat nearby, arms wrapped around her knees. When the children finally slept, curled together on the canvas, she turned to Elias. "Why are you really here?" she asked. He was poking at the fire with a stick, his face lit orange by the flames. "Was passing through, headed north. Saw the smoke. You could have kept riding." "I could have." Zadie looked at her hands. "My husband died last winter. Fever took him fast. I stayed cause this land was all we had." Elias nodded. "You do not have to explain." She looked at him, then really looked. He was older than she first thought. Maybe 30, maybe older. His eyes were tired but not unkind. There were lines around his mouth that looked like they were meant for smiling, though they had not been used in a while. "You do not seem like a man who stops just to help strangers." "I do not," he said honestly, "but I saw the way you looked at those kids, like you would burn yourself alive to keep them warm." Zadie blinked, heat rising behind her eyes. She turned away. "I am afraid," she said softly. The fire crackled. Elias reached for a piece of wood and added it to the flame. "So am I," he said, "but I would rather try with you." She looked at him, unsure if she had heard right. "You do not know me." "I know enough. That I have nothing left but 2 mouths to feed and a shotgun with 1 shell." He gave the smallest of grins. "That is more than some." They sat in silence after that, not uncomfortable, just quiet. By morning, he had started digging out the root cellar and patching the cabin roof with salvaged shingles. Zadie brought him water and patched his shirt sleeve where it had torn. The children, Nora and Nathan, followed him like shadows. 3 days passed. Then 4. Elias built a chicken coop from scrap wood and found them 2 hens from a neighbor 10 miles off. Zadie watched him from the porch one evening, her arms wrapped around herself. "You never said why you left wherever you came from," she said. Elias leaned on the fence, watching the children chase each other in the grass. "Was not much to leave behind. No wife, no family, had a brother. He died fighting in the war, nothing else kept me." Zadie stepped down from the porch, walking toward him. The wind tugged at the loose ends of her braid. "You are not just passing through anymore." He looked at her, serious now. "No, I am not." Something flickered between them, then something quiet but real. It was not sudden. It had grown in the long silences, the shared meals, the way he never asked for anything in return. That night she sat beside him by the fire closer than before. "I have no idea how to do this," she said. He looked at her gently. "Neither do I." She reached for his hand. He let her. And for the first time in months, Zadie felt her heart beat slow, not from fear, but from something softer, hope. The days stretched long under the Montana sky, and the rhythm of them took shape like a song hummed under breath, quiet, steady, unfinished. Elias slept in the lean-to behind the cabin, never asking for a place inside. He rose early, before the sun cleared the ridge, and each morning Zadie found some new corner of the homestead mended, cleaned, or built where nothing had been. By the second week, the children had started asking questions. "Are you going to marry Mama?" Nora asked one morning, sitting cross-legged in the dirt with a wooden spoon and a tin pot full of creek water. Zadie's breath caught, her hands stilling over the washboard. "Where'd you get something like that in your head?" "Just thinking," Nora said, turning the spoon. Zadie didn't answer. She wrung out the linen and hung it over the line, the wind tugging it like a child pulling at her skirts. That evening she found Elias oiling the hinges on the cabin door. His sleeves were rolled, fingers dark with grease, and the scent of pine pitch lingered on his shirt. The noise of the children playing drifted from the field, faint and distant. "She asked if you meant to marry me," Zadie said, arms folded, voice low. Elias didn't look up right away. He finished with the hinge, wiped his hands on a rag, then turned to her. "What did you tell her?" "That it was a fool's question." He nodded once. "And do you think it is?" Zadie stepped down off the porch. "I think I've been carrying too much too long. And I think I'm tired of pretending that I'm not." Elias looked at her as though he were seeing her for the first time, not as a woman trying to hold everything together, but as someone allowed to set it down. "I'd stay if you asked me to," he said. "I haven't asked. I know." They stood a long while like that, the dusk soft around them, the earth cooling beneath their boots. Somewhere in the trees, a nighthawk cried out. Zadie rubbed her arms, not from cold. "You don't flinch when things are hard." "I've flinched plenty. I just learned not to show it." "What taught you that?" He looked past her toward the edge of the field. "Winter of '71, Wyoming. I was working cattle for a man outside Laramie. Blizzards hit early. Had a boy with me just turned 17. He froze to death 2 yards from the bunkhouse door. I never forgot how quiet he looked, even dead." Zadie's throat tightened. "You were just a boy yourself." "I stopped being one that night." She stepped closer. "I haven't known what to make of you. That makes 2 of us." She reached out, fingers brushing his. "But I'm starting to want to." He didn't speak, just turned his hand and held hers, careful. That night she left the door unlatched. By morning he was still in the lean-to, same as always. But when he brought her the eggs Nora had gathered, he lingered by the table. "There's a man 3 valleys east," Elias said. "Name's Monroe. He's got a plow mule he's looking to trade. Says he'll take tools in exchange." Zadie sat Nora at the bench with a slate and chalk, handed Nathan a boiled potato to busy his hands. "What kind of tools?" "I've still got some left in my saddlebag. A draw knife, couple of rasps. You'd give them up for us?" "I'd give them up for you." She didn't blush, didn't smile, just looked at him long and steady. "You won't always like me," she said. "I snap when I'm scared and I hold onto grief longer than I should." He leaned a hip against the table. "You think I'm looking for perfection? I think you don't know what you're saying yes to. I think I do." She turned back to the stove, poured hot water into the basin, and said nothing else. But when he left that afternoon to ride east, she sent along 2 jars of preserved peaches and a kerchief she'd hemmed herself. He was gone 3 days. When he returned, the mule was hitched behind his horse, and there was a small sack of flour tied to the saddle. He handed her the reins like he belonged there. Zadie didn't speak, just took the mule and led it toward the small paddock. But her hand brushed his shoulder as she passed, a touch light as breath. That night the children fell asleep before the lamp was out. She poured 2 cups of chicory and sat across from him at the table. "You didn't have to come back," she said. "I know." "Why did you?" Because I meant it. She looked down at her cup, then back at him. I think I'm ready to try. He reached across the table, took her hand, and gave it a gentle squeeze. So am I, he said. And I'd rather try with you. The first frost crept in before October, laying its pale fingers across the ryegrass and the low hills beyond. Zadie stood barefoot on the cabin's front step, steam rising from the copper basin at her feet as she scrubbed Nathan's shirt. Elias was 20 yards off, setting fence posts along the west line, sleeves rolled up, a strip of hide wrapped around one palm where he'd blistered it the day before. Nora sat nearby with her slate, etching letters slow and precise. She didn't look up when she spoke. Will we stay here always? Zadie wrung the shirt and hung it on the line. You mean on this land? Nora nodded, still drawing. If we're lucky, Zadie said. And if the roof holds? Nora traced a curve, then paused. Will Elias stay too? Zadie glanced toward the field. Elias had paused to lean on the post driver, his gaze resting on the tree line. He hasn't said otherwise. That night, once the children were asleep and the fire was banked low, she found him outside, carving a handle for the drawknife he'd traded away. He looked up as she sat beside him on the cabin step, a wool shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. I've been thinking about the land, she said. We've enough cleared to plant oats come spring, but the soil's better near the creek bend, he nodded. We'd have to clear the cottonwood roots. That'll take time. I know. She looked down at her hands. I'm not used to planning past the next week. Elias set the carving aside. You've earned the right to think beyond surviving. She stared out into the dark. A coyote called from the ridge, sharp and high. After a moment, she said, My father was a cooper in Kansas before we moved west. He died the same year the cholera came through. My mother wouldn't leave, said the land would feed us even if nothing else did. What happened to her? She stayed too long, starved before the thaw. Elias didn't speak. He waited. I've carried that with me, she said. The staying, the pride. I told myself it was strength, but sometimes I think it was just fear in a different shape. He reached for her hand. You're not your mother, no, she whispered, but I hear her voice when I think about asking for more than I already have. It's not wrong to want more, Elias said. It's just hard when you've only known how to go without. She leaned into him then, her temple resting against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't breathe too loud. Just let her be still. The next day, she sent a letter with a ranch hand riding toward Livingston. It was addressed to the land office, a request for title transfer. She signed it Albright but left space beneath. That evening, she handed Elias the pen. He looked at the paper, then at her. You're sure? I am, he bent to write, his script careful, practiced. When he finished, he didn't hand the paper back, just asked, Do you want it filed under your name still? I want it under ours, she said. Equal. He folded the letter, slipped it into the envelope, and sealed it with wax. Later that week, a storm rolled through. The wind came first, bending the trees eastward, then rain fell hard enough to wash the dust from the shutters. They bunked together that night, the four of them, blankets spread on the floor, the fire crackling low. Zadie woke to find Elias already up, feeding kindling to the coals. She sat up slowly, blanket around her shoulders. You always rise before dawn, she asked. It's when my thoughts are quietest, he said. She watched him a moment. You ever think of going back to where you came from? There's nothing waiting for me there. There's something here, he turned to her. Yes, there is. She stood, crossed to where he knelt beside the stove and reached down. Come back to bed, she whispered. He took her hand, followed. Spring would come. The snow would melt. The oat seed would take or it wouldn't. But there, in the quiet breath of dawn, with the children sleeping safe and warmth between them, for once not born of desperation, Zadie let herself believe in a life that didn't end in loss. They had both been afraid. And still, they'd chosen this. The creek overflowed in late April, heavy with melt from the mountains. Zadie stood knee-deep in the flooded field, her skirts soaked and boots sunk in the cold mud. A fence post had come loose, dragged downstream by the current. Elias waded in beside her, his breath white in the morning air. You'll catch your death, he said, motioning toward the bank. I've seen worse, she answered, teeth set. He didn't argue. Instead, he steadied the post while she lashed it back with rawhide. When they climbed out, dripping and shivering, she took his hand without thinking, and he didn't let go. Back at the cabin, Nora had tied a blanket across the hearth to keep the smoke from curling in. Nathan sat with a tin spoon, poking holes in the ashes. Zadie peeled off her wet stockings and rubbed warmth back into her legs while Elias pulled the kettle from its hook. "You ever think about building something new?" she asked suddenly. He poured water into a mug and handed it to her. "Like what?" "A room off the back, maybe, for the children. They're growing and there's not enough space come winter." Elias rubbed his thumb along his jaw. "We'd need more lumber. I could ride west, see if the butcher place has any to trade. They'd want something for it. I've still got my old saddle, could live without it." Zadie raised an eyebrow. "That's the one you stitched yourself," he shrugged. "Things change." She studied him a moment. "You always this ready to give things up?" He leaned against the table, arms crossed. "I held on too tight to the wrong things once. Learned it's better to let go if it means something better can grow in its place." She sipped the hot water, watching him over the rim. "You say that like it doesn't hurt." "I didn't say it didn't." Outside, the wind shifted, blowing the scent of damp pine through the cracks in the walls. Zadie stood, wrapping a dry shawl around her shoulders. "I'd like to teach Nora to read proper," she said. "She's guessing half the letters." "There's a missionary school out east of Bridger," Elias said. "They might have books to spare." "I don't want to owe them." "Then we'll find another way." She looked down at her bare feet, then back at him. "You always say we now." He stepped closer, not crowding her. "That all right with you?" She didn't answer right away. Just reached out and laid her palm flat against his chest, over the beat of his heart. "Yes," she said. "It is." Later that week, while Elias loaded feed sacks into the lean-to, an old peddler wagon rolled up from the southern trail. The man behind the reins was rail-thin, missing half his teeth, and wore a battered stovepipe hat too large for his head. "I trade in what's useful," he said, voice cracked from years in the sun. "Tools, books, even shoes if you've got coin or something worth the wait." Zadie stepped forward. "You carry primers?" "I've got a McGuffey Reader, 3rd edition, bit worn but clean." Elias came around the side with an old tin coffee pot and the broken yoke from the cart he'd patched back in winter. "Fair trade." The peddler inspected the yoke, nodded once, and passed over the book. That night, Zadie knelt beside Nora at the table, tracing letters with the girl's hand. Elias watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a quiet smile in his eyes. After the children were asleep, Zadie stepped out into the night with him. The stars were clear, the air still damp from the flood. "I never pictured this," she said. "Not after everything. I figured I'd grow old alone." Elias didn't speak. He reached up and tucked a loose curl behind her ear, his fingers warm. "I don't know how to be someone's wife again," she said. "I don't think I ever knew properly." "I'm not asking for a ceremony," he said. "Just a place beside you every morning, every night." She leaned her forehead against his collarbone. "That sounds like a vow, Elias Hart." "Then let it be one." She tilted her face up, eyes steady. "You sure?" "I'd rather build a life with you than chase one I'll never find." She kissed him then, slow and sure, the kind of kiss that didn't need promise or excuse. Just truth. When they pulled apart, she took his hand and walked him back inside. There was nothing hurried about it, just quiet understanding that this was where it began. Not with grand declarations, but with the everyday choosing. A field repaired together. A book traded for a better future. A room added because 2 children would need it. They didn't need to say more. They already knew, by early June, the creek had settled back into its banks and the new room was framed and roofed. It faced east, so the morning sun would reach the children first, brushing their quilts with warmth before the rest of the house stirred. Elias had built the bed frames himself, measuring and cutting each plank while Zadie stitched ticking covers from old flour sacks, softening them with lye soap till they felt like cotton. They hadn't spoken of marriage again, not in the formal sense. But Elias had moved his things inside quietly, one item at a time, as if waiting to be told to stop. He never was. His boots sat beside hers at night. His coat hung from the same peg. On a Sunday when the sky was clear and the wind mild, they hitched the mule to the small cart and rode into town. It was the first time the four of them had gone together. Zadie wore her best dress, a faded green calico she hadn't touched since her husband's burial, and Elias had trimmed his beard to a neat line. At the general store, Nathan pressed his nose to the glass jar of molasses sticks while Nora studied the broadsides nailed near the door. Zadie leaned close to Elias as they waited for their flour to be weighed. "She's reading faster than I expected," she said. "She's got your mind," he replied. Zadie tilted her head. "No, she's got something steadier, maybe yours." He smiled faintly, not with pride but with a quiet sort of gratefulness, as though being seen that way was something he hadn't allowed himself to hope for. Afterward, they stopped by the field behind the church, where a fiddler was playing and the preacher's daughter was handing out lemon water in tin cups. Zadie sat on a low bench, watching the children chase each other through the tall grass. Elias joined her, handing her a biscuit wrapped in waxed paper. "I saw the blacksmith," he said. "He's got a stove he's willing to part with, cast iron, says it belonged to his sister before she moved east." Zadie took a bite, the bread still warm. "What does he want for it?" "Just help hauling lumber next week. I told him I'd come." She nodded slowly, then looked toward the children. "I wonder sometimes what they'll remember, whether it'll be the fire or this place we've made. They'll remember how you kept them fed. How you read to them by lamplight when your hands were raw from work. And you, they'll remember I stayed when I could have left." She looked over at him. "You never told me why you didn't." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "Because you looked at me like I was worth staying for." That night, while the children slept in their new room, Zadie sat beside Elias at the hearth with her mending basket. He was sanding the drawer front of a dresser he'd built from the leftover siding. The fire was low, the hour late. "I think I want to plant squash next year," she said. "The kind with the green skin and gold stripes. My mother used to roast them in the coals." Elias set the sandpaper aside. "We'll need to fence the far garden patch for that." "Deer'll come down hungry. I'll help with the posts." He gave a slight nod. "You always do." She reached out, tugging at the frayed seam on his shirt sleeve. "You planning to keep wearing this thing until it falls off your back?" "I thought it had a few more months in it. I'll sew you another." He met her eyes. "You already gave me more than I ever expected." Zadie set aside the mending, folding her hands in her lap. Her voice was soft but steady. "It's not charity, Elias. This is your home. You've earned your place here." He reached across the space between them, taking her hand. "I know, and I'll never take it for granted." She smiled, the kind that reached her eyes. "Then let's stop circling around it." He tilted his head. "Around what?" "This, us. I'd marry you tomorrow if we had a preacher close enough." Elias didn't speak. He stood crossed to the pegs by the door and pulled down a small tin box. When he opened it, there was a narrow silver band inside, dull with age but whole. "I carried this for years," he said. "Didn't know why. Guess I do now." He held it out and Zadie rose slowly, heart thudding in her chest. "I'd be honored," she whispered. He took her hand, slid the ring on her finger. It fit as though it had waited for her. They married 2 days later, under the cottonwoods by the creek. The preacher from Red Lodge came up on horseback, and the neighbors brought pie and coffee. Nora wore a ribbon in her hair, and Nathan carried the folded quilt they'd stitched for the occasion. They said their vows with no fanfare. No music, just the sound of the water behind them and the wind through the grass. That night, after the guests had gone and the children were tucked in, Elias led Zadie to the bed they now shared. "Still afraid?" he asked. "Only of wasting time," she answered. He kissed her, slow and sure, and they lay together in the quiet, the kind of quiet born not from absence but from peace. Years passed. The squash grew thick in the fenced garden, and the oats took root deeper each spring. The children outgrew their beds, and Elias built new ones. A second room was added when the winter of '84 brought another child, a girl with dark curls and Zadie's eyes. They named her Ruth. Zadie taught all three to read. Elias taught them how to mend a fence and cut a straight line in plank. When the roof needed replacing, they did it together, side by side under the sun. They did not speak often of the years before, of the things they'd lost. But sometimes, in the soft hush before dawn, Zadie would reach for Elias and hold him like she had the night the barn burned, the night he chose to stay. He always held her back, and they were happy. Not in the way of stories, but in the way of people who had earned it brick by brick, morning by morning, love growing not from grand moments, but from steady hands, kind eyes, and the quiet certainty that they belonged to each other, forever.